Have you ever thought you knew everything about a famous landmark, only to uncover a dark secret that changes everything? I'm Dan, and what I found out about the Seattle Needle might just keep you up at night. The Space Needle has always been a symbol of Seattle's skyline, a beacon of progress and innovation. As a lifelong resident, I'd been up there countless times, but something about my most recent visit felt different. It all started when I decided to take a day off work and play tourist in my own city. I was standing in line for the elevator when I overheard two workers talking in hushed tones. One of them mentioned something about a restricted area below the Needle, a place visitors never get to see. My curiosity was piqued. After all, I'd always thought I'd seen everything the Space Needle had to offer. Once at the top, I couldn't shake off the conversation I had overheard. I wandered around, admiring the view but also looking for any signs of this mysterious restricted area. That's when I noticed an unmarked door near the maintenance section. It wasn't locked, and without thinking, I slipped inside. The narrow stairwell led me down to what seemed like a storage room, filled with old equipment and dusty memorabilia. I was about to leave when something caught my eye, a series of old photographs pinned to a corkboard. They were black and white, and some had faded over time, but the subjects were clear: construction workers, engineers, and something else. One photo, in particular, stood out. It was of a group of men in hard hats standing around a large, cylindrical object. The caption read, "Seattle Needle Foundation, 1961. But what drew my attention was the faint, ghostly image in the background. It looked like a figure, barely visible, watching the workers. I felt a chill run down my spine. Who, or what, was that? That night, I couldn't stop thinking about the photos. Who was the figure in the background? And why had those pictures been hidden away in a dusty, forgotten room? I decided to do some research. The next day, I visited the local library and dug into the archives. There wasn't much information about the Needle's construction that I didn't already know, but I did find one obscure article in an old local newspaper. The article was from 1962, shortly after the Needle's completion. It detailed a series of mysterious incidents that occurred during construction. Workers reported seeing strange shadows and hearing eerie noises late at night. A few even claimed to have seen a ghostly figure wandering the site. At the time, it was written off as superstition or the result of exhaustion from long hours and high stress. But the more I read, the more uneasy I felt. The descriptions matched the figure in the photograph I had found. I decided to dig deeper, reaching out to anyone who might have been involved in the construction. Most were long gone, but I managed to track down one man, Harold, who had been a young engineer on the project. Harold was reluctant to talk at first, but when I mentioned the photograph, his tone changed. He invited me over to his house, and when I arrived, he looked anxious, almost afraid. He led me to his basement, where he kept boxes of old memorabilia from his days as an engineer. Among them, he showed me a journal, his personal account of the Needle's construction. His entries from 1961 were filled with technical notes and mundane details, but as the year progressed, the tone changed. Harold wrote about the same strange occurrences the article had mentioned: shadows, noises, and the figure. He described an incident where a worker fell to his death, and while the official cause was listed as an accident, Harold believed otherwise. He wrote about the night before the final sections of the Needle were put in place. Harold and a few others were working late when they saw the figure up close. He described it as a man in an old-fashioned suit, with hollow eyes and a sinister smile. They tried to approach it, but it vanished into thin air. The next day, the worker fell, and after that, the sighting stopped. Harold's journal was both fascinating and terrifying. I couldn't help but feel a growing sense of dread as I read through his accounts. The figure he described seemed to be more than just a figment of imagination or a trick of the light. But what was it? And why was it connected to the Needle? Harold hesitated before sharing one last piece of information. He showed me a sketch he had made of the figure, and it was eerily similar to the one in the photograph. He also mentioned something he had never told anyone else: the figure spoke to him that night. It whispered about protecting the secrets of the Needle and guarding against those who would uncover the truth. I left Harold's house with a mix of emotions. On one hand, I was excited to have uncovered such a chilling piece of history. On the other, I was deeply disturbed. Who was this figure? And what secrets was it guarding? I knew I had to return to the Space Needle and see if I could find any more clues. The next day, I made my way back to the Needle. This time, I was determined to get to the bottom of this mystery. I managed to sneak back into the restricted area, hoping to find more photographs or documents that could shed some light on the figure. As I rummaged through old boxes, I found a set of blueprints that were different from the ones usually displayed for tourists. These blueprints showed a series of tunnels and rooms beneath the Needle, something I had never heard of before. There were annotations in the margins, detailing what appeared to be security measures and warnings about the foundations. My heart raced as I realized that there was much more to the Space Needle than met the eye. As I studied the blueprints, I heard footsteps echoing down the stairwell. I quickly hid behind a stack of crates, my heart pounding in my chest. The footsteps grew louder, and soon, I saw the silhouette of a man approaching. It wasn't a security guard, it was Harold. Harold's unexpected presence caught me off guard. He seemed just as surprised to see me there, but his expression quickly turned to one of concern. He motioned for me to stay quiet and led me deeper into the restricted area. We descended a hidden staircase that wasn't on any of the blueprints. "Why are you here?" I whispered, trying to keep my voice steady. "I couldn't let you come back alone," he replied. "There's something you need to know." At the bottom of the staircase, Harold led me into a dimly lit tunnel. The air was damp and the walls were lined with old, rusting pipes. We stopped in front of a large metal door. Harold pulled out a key from his pocket and unlocked it, revealing a small room filled with filing cabinets and old documents. "This is where they kept everything," Harold said, his voice barely above a whisper. "Every incident, every sighting, it's all documented here." I began sifting through the files, and my heart sank as I realized the extent of the cover-up. The Space Needle was built over a site with a dark history, a place where numerous disappearances and unexplained deaths had occurred long before the needle was constructed. The figure, it seemed, was the restless spirit of someone connected to those events. Harold showed me a file labeled Project Sentinel. It detailed the efforts to contain the spirit and keep the history buried. According to the documents, the needle was designed not just as an observation tower, but as a kind of containment structure. The foundation, which had always been shrouded in secrecy, was specifically engineered to trap the spirit and prevent it from causing more harm. "We were never supposed to talk about this," Harold said, his voice shaking. "But the spirit, it's growing stronger. I think it's because of the renovations and the increased activity around the needle. The containment is failing." Before I could respond, a loud crash echoed through the tunnels. Harold and I froze. The spirit had found us. The room plunged into darkness as the lights flickered and went out. I felt a cold breeze sweep through the tunnel, and the air grew thick with an oppressive, almost tangible fear. Harold grabbed my arm and pulled me towards the exit. "We need to get out of here," he whispered urgently. "It's here." As we hurried through the tunnels, I could hear faint whispers and the sound of footsteps echoing behind us. The spirit was following us, and it was getting closer. We reached the staircase and scrambled up, our breaths coming in short, panicked gasps. Just as we reached the top, the door slammed shut behind us with a deafening bang. Harold and I exchanged a terrified glance. We knew we weren't alone. The spirit was trying to trap us down there, just like it had trapped so many others before. We made our way back to the maintenance area, where we found the unmarked door we had entered through. Harold held it open for me, and just as I stepped through, I felt a cold hand grasp my ankle. I kicked frantically, breaking free and stumbling into the daylight. Harold followed, slamming the door behind him. We stood there, panting and shaking, the bright Seattle sunshine feeling surreal after the darkness of the tunnels. The realization hit me, we had barely escaped with our lives. The spirit was real, and it was angry. It had been disturbed and it wasn't going to rest until its story was told. Harold looked at me with a grave expression. "We can't keep this a secret any longer," he said. "People need to know the truth about the needle." The days following our escape were a blur of anxiety and paranoia. Harold and I decided to go public with our findings. We contacted local journalists and prepared to reveal everything we had discovered about the Space Needle's dark history and the spirit haunting its foundations. However, just as we were about to make our announcement, Harold disappeared. I tried calling him, but his phone went straight to voicemail. His house was empty, and none of his neighbors had seen him. It was as if he had vanished without a trace. I was left alone to face the media. I presented the documents and told our story, but without Harold's testimony, many were skeptical. Some called it a hoax, others accused me of trying to tarnish the reputation of Seattle's most iconic landmark. The authorities dismissed my claims, and the Space Needle remained open to the public. Despite the skepticism, a few independent investigators took an interest in our story. They began their own research, but soon found themselves facing the same strange occurrences, shadows, whispers, and unexplained phenomena. Some even reported seeing the same figure that Harold and I had encountered. I moved away from Seattle, unable to live with the constant fear and the memories of what we had uncovered. But even miles away, I couldn't escape the feeling that the spirit was still watching me, waiting for the right moment to strike. To this day, the Space Needle stands tall, a beacon of innovation and progress. But beneath its foundations lies a dark secret, one that continues to haunt those who dare to uncover it. And as long as the truth remains buried, the spirit will never rest. Who knows, maybe one day, someone else will stumble upon the photographs or hear the whispers in the tunnels. And when they do, they too will have to face the terrifying reality that the past never truly stays buried.